Hi, welcome everyone to Life Raft's security spotlight session. Today, where we're talking about prepping for 2026, with this being such a massive events year. Now, listen, like we all know that 2026 is shaping up to be one of the most heaviest operational years for security leaders that they've seen in a long time, right? We've got global events, and with that comes crowded cities. We've got heightened political tensions, and these are all intersecting at the same time. And let's be practical. We know it's a heavy event year, but it's not just about venue security teams or sporting team security staff. It's really about every business and organization that is in proximity that will feel the ripple effect of that. And it's about how those organizations prepare its people's processes and its infrastructure to sustain a period of risk and disruption. So today's spotlight, our live today, is for any security leader who is looking to spin up a new team or looking to transform an existing program. It's for those folks. And so with me today, I've got as our guest, Amanda Jones. Amanda has got over 20 years as security management leader experience, and this includes revitalizing teams and spinning up new threat intelligence teams and programs. So absolutely perfect. So Amanda's here to help us unpack what this all means in practice when you're planning for your year. You know, how to build readiness, how to lead through uncertainty, and how to make sure your team is prepared for not just the big events on the calendar, but all the things that come with those big events on the calendar. So Amanda, thank you. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to getting into this.
Yeah, right. We've got a jam-packed bunch of things I want to talk to you about. So I'm going to get started and just jump into there. Okay. We already set the stage for what 2026 is going to be like. So as a security leader in Q1, so now, how do I start planning for a year like this? Yeah, you know, where the threat landscape, it includes physical security, risk intelligence, political violence, and critical infrastructure issues all at once. What's your advice there? How do I start planning for that?
Well, that's a heck of a first question to have. I think I think it really you should start off with by unifying your risk taxonomy. You know, mapping out your threats by the impact, the velocity, and the interdependencies across physical, cyber, information, and reputational domains. It's critical to have these tools and technology in place to deliver these tailored alerts, both raw data and the analyst verified, in an automated fashion so that you don't have to manually search for these issues. It's always the worst thing in the world when you're a security professional to be behind the eight ball. We want to try to get ahead of the game. And this will ensure that these timely alerts are protecting our people, our assets, our spaces, information, and reputation. I think it's also important to establish like quarterly risk horizons, you know, anticipating where these pressure points are going to shift across our calendar, whether, like you were saying, be elections, holidays, mega events, and then set those explicit trigger thresholds for action. I think it's also important to build a capability baseline so that you can scale, you know, using your core governance, cross-functional incident command, and clear rapid decision and communication rights in that. And then layering in your surge capacities with staff, partners, and tech as needed to go along. I think it's also important to invest in scenario planning that moves from more of like the linear event thinking to a cascading risk model. So for example, how a cyber disruption might cascade into physical access control issues or supply chain disruption. It's not always going to be physical security to physical security or cyber to cyber. And then solidify your measurement. And I'm not talking about like incidents that have been avoided or anything like that, but more of like time to detection, time to resolve. And then also another one that many people seem to forget at times is that staff wellness and fatigue metrics so that we're preventing our burnout during sustained risk and elevated times. And then, of course, accountability and rhythms, making sure that we have executive sponsorship, having those monthly risk reviews and that clear escalation path in place so that no threat goes undocumented.
That was a lot of good stuff in there. And, you know, I like that you talked about don't just trust in a linear cycle and management cycle, because really, truly, when you have these mega events, it never goes as planned. There's always going to be a scenario, you know, that's a gotcha. But also what I want to touch on is something you mentioned just now, and it's not one that was on my list to go through. But you talked about staff wellness, and I want to tackle this off the top because a lot of people neglect to talk about this. Why is this important?
Well, I think it's important because you have generally most security teams are very lean, if not anemic. Let's face it, based on budgetary constraints and just headcount. So it's on a lot of high performers to be able to not only perform the day-to-day tasks, but to anticipate, to resolve, to then go back and revamp processes based on after action reviews. And so it takes people look at their job descriptions. That's not just what you do. You're doing everything in between. You fill in all the gaps, and you're constantly shifting and adapting to shifting priorities and having that agility to do so. And it takes a lot of bandwidth, both physically and mentally. And so if you take a high performer and you set them at 100 miles an hour in January, can you honestly expect them to be continuing to run 100 miles an hour come December once all the big events have held and they've been running at such a high sustained speed for so long? And it's sometimes, like I said, it gets overlooked. So we need to be cognizant as leaders of what those warning signs are so that we can anticipate that fatigue. And that can be done through cross training. That can be done through regular feedback sessions. That can be done through pressure testing our different policies and response efforts to see how people are handling that stress and if we need to step in and supplement support as needed.
This is such an important topic, and I feel like it's one that we should do an entire spotlight on because you talked about identifying the warning signs and the triggers, and I would love to go deeper into that, but I'm going to stick to our program. But thank you for addressing that question for me. So now I want to go, because we've got people on here who are watching this who may not be associated with a venue or a sporting team or whatnot, or in charge of doing a political event, but I'm a business or a hotel who's nearby. So I want to talk about those people. Because when you look at the 2026 calendar of mega events, I want to know what should be top of mind for security leaders who are not directly in sports or venue security, but they're close by and can feel the ripple effect. Do they approach this differently? What should they be thinking about? And should they even be concerned? You tell me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think we as security leaders should always anticipate a constant ripple effect from any event. Thinking of mega events themselves, they bring mass crowds with diverse viewpoints. Opposition and escalation are inevitable. So I would plan for both direct and indirect security impacts on your city and the organizations that are in close proximity. But then also organizations who may not necessarily be in close physical proximity, but may still have reputational or political proximity based on, whether you're, for example, like oil and gas or health insurance, some high trigger point organizations. And so I think it's important to engage in proactive information sharing and joint exercises with city services, critical infrastructure sectors, and private partners early. You want to start these playbooks before the crowds start arriving, right? And then, consider your interoperable risk visibility. So ensure that your data and alerts across physical, cyber, and reputational domains are feeding into some sort of single actionable escalation view. Last thing you want to do is be searching through multiple platforms to try to understand the totality of circumstances that you're being faced with, right? And then establish your sustained workforce readiness, kind of going back into that, the fatigue management. So design your surge protocols, emphasizing fatigue management. And then again, cross-training those teams for those extended events to make sure that we can basically interchange operational specializations accordingly. And then focus on public-facing risk communication and rumor control. I think that's a huge one. Ensuring that the messaging is timely, that it's accurate, and it's aligned not only with law enforcement and outside services and public safety partners, but your own internal messaging in that culture that you have with your employees. Another focus should be supply chain and vendor resiliency. Mm-hmm. Third-party security and continuity plans can support citywide. Can they support region-wide surges, or do we need to put mitigations in place for that? And I think it's also important not to forget equity and duty of care. Ensuring our staffing models are protecting our staff safety and our community of trust, especially during protests or tense political movements.
These are really great. Your answers are amazing. And I'm so glad people will be able to watch this back. You have a lot of really good nuggets in there. I do like how you talked about political proximity. So it's not just physical proximity, but if you have alignment with whatever is happening in that event, or whatever political tensions happening right now in the world, you could be at risk when a mega event comes to your city.
Of course.
You also talked about getting involved with the city very early on in services. So I want to jump to a question that I was going to ask much later, but I want to piggyback on what you just said. So we know that major events, they require a lot of intense interagency cooperation. I'm just looking at World Cup, FIFA, that's going to be across 48 host cities in 3 different countries. Like, talk about massive, talk about all kinds of strains that could be happening. But for someone who is maybe this is their first mega event where they're in charge of managing their team and their whole threat intel program, what are practical steps that corporate and institutional security teams can take to plug into networks easily and effectively?
Sure. No, I think that's a great question. I really think it's important for security teams to establish that proactive risk communication messaging so that it's truthful, it's timely, and it's aligned, like I said, with that public safety partner and then your internal organizational language. Duty of care, again, going back to that, this should already be embedded in your security program. But if it's not established, establish it quickly, because this will ensure that our policies are protecting our staff safety and rights. This includes like de-escalation protocols and clear escalation guidelines, not only internally, but externally as well to these city partners. And then I think it's also important that, reputational risk monitoring functions should include social media and other OSINT learning listening systems, as well as, rapid response playbooks being in place to address not only misinformation, but misperceptions before they grow. I mean, as well as I do, the internet can run away with a message and it's, 5 versions away in 20 minutes. And that's, that can be damaging to a company's reputation or even their physical security as well. So this function should be defined and have that ownership established early to reduce the possibility of not only untimely alerting, but delayed response. And then, it's something that people probably are a little shy of is having transparent reporting. It's one thing to be an honest reporting department, but you want to be transparent. You want to get ahead of the questions. You don't want to just wait for the questions to be asked. And I think if you're new in a team, or if your team is new to an organization, building and maintaining that credibility by publishing your post-incident summaries before they're asked for with the corrective actions to your leadership and, involved designated stakeholders is super important to maintain that confidence ahead of time. So when you do come to them with guidance down the road in the middle of a surge or in the middle of a crisis or event, they're less likely to start second guessing and questioning, thereby delaying your ability to respond.
I think that's so important because it speaks to brand reputation, right? Which could be at risk during these mega events because of your association or you're sponsoring an event and it gets a little tense or dicey. And transparency is so important, especially in an era of social media where things, as you said, can go viral very quickly. And the messages that you don't want people spreading about you and your brand will spread like wildfire. Being mindful of time, and I want to get to some questions in here too. So this stream is set up to talk about, getting yourself ready for 2026 and this mega event year that we have going on. And so I want to ask you a practical kind of how-to question. So, for anybody who's spinning up a new security function or division during a year like this one, what are the first 3 things you would tell them to focus on?
Oh. There's so many things that we touch. I know, right? So what are your top 3? Well, I think I would prioritize, incident command and cross-sector coordination. I think that's huge. You want to have that formal, scalable command structure that can plug into city or enterprise crisis networks from day one. I think threat intelligence and real-time sensing is also a pivotal point to have. And a lot of security teams sometimes don't prioritize that because they just want to get their ducks in a row in terms of physical security, access control and all these other things. But having that running in the background for you and getting that unified view of threats across physical, cyber, and reputational domains with the rapid validation and action workflows will cut your response time in half, if not more. The last thing you want to do, again, is have a major event occur and you don't find out till hours later. And then your leadership's like, what happened? You're like, well, that's a very good question. Let me find out for you. But then also, I think the third thing I would consider is probably workforce scalability and capability mixing. So having that robust mix of not only internal staff, but train contractors, specialized partners, plus have, again, those clear surge protocols so that you can flex up quickly without compromising your safety or quality. And the rationale I kind of use behind this is these three will kind of create like almost like a scaffold for coordinated action, right? Having faster decision making, adaptable capacity as that tempo rises.
You just segued greatly into my next question for you. But if anybody out there has got a question, I see someone was testing to see if they can ask questions. Go ahead and interrupt me because we've got just a few minutes left, and I have like a ton more questions for Amanda. But if you've got one out there, please drop it in the chat. Let's talk about staffing. You just touched on it. How do I prepare myself as a security leader? Like, you've got these mega events happening throughout the year, and of course, at those times, I'm likely going to need to ramp up, so I'm better prepared because the demand is going to be more. How do you plan for that? How do you set yourself up so you can do that? And then I also want you to touch on, you used an analogy with me before when we were talking about filling my 40-hour work week with day to day. I want you to talk about that because I think that's a really interesting viewpoint.
Sure. No, I think that, one of the something I've run into before is, sometimes you get some old school representation that when your leaders are saying, hey, if you want this headcount, how are they going to fill their 40-hour work week? Do we have enough work for them to fill this 40-hour work week? And I think what it comes down to is busyness does not necessarily equate to value. Just because I'm busy doesn't mean I'm providing any value for the team. And so I think that's where we supplement with tools and AI and some of these other solutions that we can do. And so I think that way it opens us up to be able to mature, to be able to respond, and to be able to really focus and enhance our response efforts and our even education efforts to our employees and our constituents that we support. So going back to what you're saying about, how do you prepare your team for this? I think it's important to build that modular staffing model. You have your core permanent team for governance and critical functions, but you need to supplement this by vetted partner pools. So you have clearly defined roles and SLAs. The last thing you want to be doing is fighting the procurement and third-party vendor onboarding process in the midst of a surge when you're trying to get support outside of your own headcount. And I think it's also important to, establish that pre-event credentialing and onboarding. So you have those rapid deployment protocols, you have compliance checks, and you can scenario-based train your staff, again, before the surge hits. The last thing you want them to do is, and the first time you want to interact with them is not going to be in the middle of a surge. You want to have that established ahead of time to be a little preemptive. And then, I would also strengthen or reinforce your cross-skill critical competencies. Blend physical with cyber. Blend crisis communications and data analytics capabilities so that all teams can cover multiple domains as needed. So again, we're reducing that fatigue because we have support outside our own headcount. And then, invest in automation and decision support. AI is a huge thing right now. I think it's important to have AI-enabled monitoring dashboards and risk scoring, to have those pre-scripted playbooks to support that. So that way you're reducing that cognitive load during your surges. And then again, I'm always going to say, rehearse. You got to rehearse with your partners. You got a quarterly drill. You've got to connect with vendors and law enforcement and public safety agencies because you want to validate that readiness. You want to update your contracts and make sure that your memorandums of understanding or your MOUs are not going to be in conflict with each other.
That's really good. The scenario planning with staff that you pointed out, I'm assuming you would also do that with your partners and contractors. It doesn't make a difference. Anybody who you've signed on with, they'll have to go through the same scenario planning. That makes a lot of sense. All right, Amanda, listen, I have 1,000 more questions for you, but we're at time. But before we go, I do want to turn it over to you and ask you if you have any final advice on this topic.
Yeah, I know that, like you said, there's tons of other things I would love to talk about. So 20 minutes is super lean for this, but that's great. That means we can have a point two, right? We can have a second one down the road. All right, I would say, lead with clarity and purpose as a leader. In the year 2026, your team is going to be pulled in many directions. So just anticipate that now. So find one or two clear priorities and keep every decision that you make aligned to them. Turn your governance into habit. Establish those regular risk reviews and pre-event readouts with your sponsors and partners. Invest in your people. Define those components for cross-training, fatigue management, and surge readiness. Build your partnerships early. Pre-negotiate the information sharing in those joint exercises so we're not stumbling as we need to respond. Automation, use it wisely. I think automation should be deployed, but keep that human in the loop, in that monitoring over that oversight, so that way the automation doesn't run away from you or start to shift or drift. We want to keep that aligned. Communication is key. Communicate early, communicate often. That consistent messaging will build trust and coordination, not only between your stakeholders, but those you answer to, your executive levels and your customers as well. And then, stay curious, exercise, test your exercise, pressure test, and proofread your programs to make sure that they're operating the way they're supposed to, and be ready to adapt, because the threat is going to evolve. It's never going to stay the way it is in the textbook. So be ready for that and anticipate that. And I think, if nothing else, you won't fall flat on your face.
Love that. Your talk about transparency, your talk about not just proximity, physical proximity, but your reputational, political proximity as well. This was really, really good. A lot of really great information. Also, I'm going to call out that you, I think, are one of the few that actually talked about staff wellness and analyst wellness and making sure they can stand the test of time for what's coming up in the year. Amanda, thank you so much for all the information you shared. And I think you're right. We will have to do a part 2 because we didn't get to all of our questions today. But I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for taking the time. And thank you, everybody who was here and watched the stream. Watch it again, because there are a lot of really good nuggets that Amanda shared with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.